I am Hannah, 32 years old, and what should have been a joyful birthday celebration turned into a nightmare I never expected. 7 years of marriage to James led to this moment that stunned everyone in our living room. When his hand struck my cheek, the room fell silent. But instead of tears, something strange happened. I laughed. And that laugh changed everything in an instant, shattering the facade he had built around us. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button and stay with me to see how one laugh can break the chains of a controlling relationship. Before James entered my life, I had built a promising career as a graphic designer at a small but respected agency in Boston. My parents, both teachers, had always supported my creative pursuits, and my younger sister Melissa was my best friend and confidant. We shared everything from childhood secrets to adult worries. My life was full of meaningful connections and professional fulfillment. I was independent, confident, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. I met James at my college roommate's wedding. He was the best man, tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that hinted at his financial success. During the reception, he approached me with a glass of champagne and a warm smile that reached his eyes. "You must be Hannah," he said, extending his hand. "I noticed you during the ceremony. You have a beautiful smile." His charm was effortless, and his attention felt special. Throughout the evening, he sought me out, asking thoughtful questions about my work and listening intently to my answers. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, it felt like the beginning of something meaningful. Our romance moved quickly. James sent flowers to my workplace, planned elaborate dates, and remembered every detail I shared. 3 months in, he surprised me with a weekend trip to New York, complete with Broadway tickets and dinner at an exclusive restaurant where he somehow knew the chef personally. 6 months later, he proposed on a private yacht cruise around Boston Harbor with a diamond ring that took my breath away. "You deserve the world, Hannah," he said as he slipped the ring onto my finger. "Let me give it to you." We married within a year of meeting in a ceremony that James insisted on planning to the last detail. At the time, I found it romantic that he wanted everything to be perfect for me. I didn't notice how he overruled my preference for a small, intimate wedding in favor of a lavish event with many of his business associates present. The first year of marriage seemed perfect. James was generous with gifts and compliments. He encouraged me to redecorate our luxury condo to my taste, though he subtly steered my choices toward what he preferred. When I mentioned wanting to visit my parents for a weekend, he suggested we both go the following month when his schedule cleared. I waited, not recognizing this as the first instance of him controlling when I saw my family. The subtle signs appeared gradually. James began checking my phone regularly, explaining it as playful curiosity rather than monitoring. He questioned my friendships, particularly with my best friend Natalie, who he claimed seemed jealous of our relationship. "I just worry about negative influences," he said with concern that seemed genuine. "Some people can be toxic without you realizing it." I began to see my friendships through his eyes, questioning their value and intentions. Natalie, who had been my friend since college, became an occasional text message rather than a weekly lunch date. When she expressed concern about my withdrawal, James suggested she wanted our marriage to fail so she could have me to herself. The accusation seemed extreme, but by then I had already begun to doubt my own judgment. James encouraged me to leave my agency job when a major client complained about a design I created. "You deserve better than a place that doesn't appreciate your talent," he said, holding me as I cried over the criticism. "Focus on freelancing. I make enough for both of us." What I didn't know then was that James had connections to that client and had subtly undermined my work during a golf outing. I discovered this years later through an accidental meeting with my former boss. 2 years into our marriage, James received what he called a dream opportunity with his investment firm in Minneapolis, requiring us to relocate. The move meant leaving my growing freelance network and putting hundreds of miles between me and my family in Boston. When I expressed hesitation, James made me feel selfish for considering standing in the way of his career advancement. "This is what marriage is about, Hannah, supporting each other's dreams," he said conveniently, forgetting how I had already sacrificed my stable career for him. In Minneapolis, I knew no one except James's mother, Elaine, who lived nearby and inserted herself into our lives with alarming frequency. She treated me like an accessory to her son's success rather than his partner. When James criticized my cooking or household management, Elaine offered helpful advice that always aligned with his preferences. "James works so hard," she would remind me. "The least you can do is make sure everything at home is exactly how he likes it." As the years passed, I became increasingly isolated. My phone calls with my sister became less frequent, partly because James always seemed to create a crisis that needed my attention whenever I planned to speak with her. My parents visited once, but felt so unwelcome by James's cold politeness that they stayed in a hotel and left a day early. It was Melissa who finally broke through my isolation. 6 months ago, she sent me an email to my old account that I rarely checked, announcing she had accepted a job in Minneapolis and would be moving nearby. When I told James, he couldn't hide his displeasure, but had no legitimate reason to object to my sister living in the same city. Melissa's presence became my lifeline. She noticed the changes in me immediately, though I tried to hide them. During our first lunch together without James, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Hannah, what's happened to you?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. "You used to light up a room, now you seem afraid of your own shadow." I brushed off her concern, making excuses about stress and adjustment to a new city, even though we had lived in Minneapolis for over 4 years by then. But her question planted a seed that I couldn't ignore. What had happened to me? Where was the confident, creative woman I used to be? As the years passed, James's control tightened like a noose around every aspect of my life. What began as subtle suggestions evolved into explicit rules and expectations. The financial freedom I once enjoyed disappeared entirely after James convinced me to close my personal bank accounts and merge everything into joint accounts that conveniently only he actively managed. "It makes more sense for tax purposes," he explained with the confident authority he used when he wanted to end any discussion. "Besides, I work in finance. This is literally what I do for a living, Hannah." Each month, he transferred an allowance into a checking account for me to use for groceries, household items, and personal expenses. When the money ran out before month's end, as it often did due to his unrealistic budget, I had to explain every purchase and request additional funds, like a child asking for pocket money. The humiliation of these conversations gradually conditioned me to spend as little as possible on myself. $40 for a haircut, he questioned once scrolling through the transaction history on my account. The Great Clips near the grocery store charges $15. This seems excessive. The fact that he spent hundreds on his own grooming at an exclusive men's salon was apparently different. His appearance directly impacted his career, he explained. Mine was just vanity. James's emotional manipulation was even more damaging than the financial control. He became a master at gaslighting, making me question my own memories and perceptions so effectively that I began keeping secret notes on my phone to remind myself of what had actually happened during our arguments. I never said you couldn't go to Melissa's for dinner. He would insist, despite having explicitly forbidden it the day before. "You always twist my words, Hannah. It's frustrating when you make me the villain in these fictional scenarios you create." After enough of these incidents, I began to doubt my own sanity. Was my memory really that faulty? Was I being unfair to James by misinterpreting his words? The constant self-doubt was exhausting. Social interactions became minefields as James insisted on accompanying me everywhere, monitoring every conversation. At dinner parties with his colleagues, he developed a habit of interrupting whenever I spoke for more than a minute. What Hannah means is, he would interject, placing his hand on my arm in what looked like affection to others, but felt like a warning to me. He would then proceed to clarify my thoughts, usually altering them significantly in the process. If I shared a personal story that painted him in anything less than a perfect light, he would correct it immediately. "Hannah exaggerates for dramatic effect," he would tell our companions with an indulgent smile. Here's what actually happened. Over time, I stopped speaking much in social settings. It was easier to smile politely and let James control the narrative than to face the subtle corrections and undermining later when we were alone. My once confident personality receded behind a wall of anxiety and self-doubt. I second-guessed every decision, from what to wear to how to respond to casual questions. James had trained me to anticipate his disapproval so thoroughly that I began to censor myself even when he wasn't present. During our rare phone conversations, Melissa noticed the change in my voice and demeanor. "You sound different," she said during one call. "You pause before answering simple questions like you're afraid of saying the wrong thing." I laughed it off, claiming I was just tired, but her observation struck a nerve. When had I become so fearful? When had I started editing my thoughts before expressing them, in secret? I joined an online support forum for women in controlling relationships, using a library computer to avoid leaving any trace on our home devices. Reading other women's stories was both validating and terrifying. The patterns were so similar, the progression so predictable. Many of these relationships had escalated from control to physical abuse. Would mine follow the same trajectory? Through the forum and articles I found linked there, I began to recognize the signs of emotional abuse and coercive control. The realization that my marriage fit these patterns was devastating, but also oddly liberating. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't oversensitive. What was happening to me was real, recognized, and wrong. As this awareness grew, so did James's volatility. Any small challenge to his authority triggered disproportionate anger. When I suggested we might visit my parents for Christmas, instead of spending it with his mother, as we did every year, he exploded. "After everything I do for you, this is how you repay me, by trying to take me away from my mother during the holidays. Do you enjoy hurting the people who love you, Hannah?" The outburst was so extreme compared to my simple suggestion that it should have been comical. Instead, it left me shaking and apologizing profusely for my selfishness. A week before my birthday, Melissa insisted on taking me to dinner, just the two of us. James objected initially, but relented when she framed it as a pre-birthday tradition rather than a challenge to his control. At the restaurant, safely away from James's monitoring, Melissa reached for my hand across the table. "I'm worried about you," she said plainly. "This isn't a healthy relationship, Hannah. The way he watches you, corrects you, isolates you. It's textbook control." I started to defend him automatically, but the rehearsed excuses sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Has he ever hurt you physically?" Melissa asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No," I answered truthfully. "It's not like that. Not yet," she replied. "But emotional abuse often escalates, Hannah. I need you to know I'm here whatever happens. My apartment has a spare room. Day or night, you can come to me." For the first time in years, I felt supported, seen. The small spark of my former self that had been smothering under James's control flickered a bit brighter. I returned home that evening with a subtle shift in my perspective, a tiny reclamation of the woman I used to be. James initially refused when I suggested hosting a birthday party at our home. "You know, I find these social gatherings exhausting, Hannah," he sighed, loosening his tie after returning from work. "Wouldn't you prefer a nice dinner, just the two of us? I could make reservations at La Belle." La Belle was his favourite restaurant, not mine. I preferred casual dining where the atmosphere didn't require perfect posture and whispered conversations. But after years of acquiescing, something in me stood firm. "I want to celebrate with friends and family this year." I insisted, surprising both of us with my determination. "I hardly ever ask for anything, James. This is important to me." His jaw tightened briefly before he composed his expression into careful neutrality. "Fine, but keep it small and tasteful. I don't want our home turned into some college frat party." The condescension stung, but I had won this small battle. I tried not to show my excitement as I began planning. James predictably took over the guest list immediately. My suggestions of old college friends were dismissed as impractical, given the distance they would need to travel. My request to invite several co-workers from my brief stint at a local design studio, before James convinced me to quit, was reduced to just 2 people he deemed appropriate. His colleagues from the investment firm, however, were essential invitees, particularly his boss David and David's wife Laura. "This is a networking opportunity as much as a celebration," he reminded me, as if my birthday's primary purpose was advancing his career. Despite these limitations, I felt a growing excitement. Melissa would be there. My friend Samantha, who had recently moved to Minneapolis and whom James hadn't yet had the chance to push away, confirmed she would attend. Even with James's colleagues dominating the list, this would be the first time in years I would be surrounded by people who weren't exclusively his choices. On the day of the party, Melissa arrived early to help with preparations, much to James's poorly concealed annoyance. She brought decorations in my favourite colours, including a handmade banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Hannah," in beautiful calligraphy. James eyed it with disapproval. "We already ordered professional decorations," he told her coolly. "The theme is elegant simplicity." Melissa smiled sweetly. "Well, now the theme is celebrating Hannah properly. Much more appropriate, don't you think?" I busied myself in the kitchen to hide my smile, as James struggled to maintain his composure in the face of my sister's cheerful defiance. Already this birthday felt different from the carefully controlled celebrations of previous years. Guests began arriving at 7. James positioned himself by the door, greeting each person with his public persona, a warm, charming host who adored his wife and wanted her birthday to be special. I watched the performance from across the room, marveling at how convincing it would seem to anyone who didn't live behind closed doors with him. "Hannah, come say hello to David and Laura." James called, his voice carrying the subtle command I had learned to recognize and obey. David, James's boss, was a tall man with kind eyes that seemed to notice more than he let on. His handshake was firm, his birthday wishes genuine. Laura embraced me warmly. "Happy birthday, Hannah. James talks about you constantly at work functions, but we've had so few chances to actually get to know you," she said, linking her arm through mine in a friendly gesture. "We need to fix that." James quickly interjected, steering the conversation toward a recent company success in which he had played a key role. I recognized the tactic he had been using for years, introduce me as an accessory to his life, then redirect attention to himself before I could form any meaningful connections. But tonight felt different. As more guests arrived and the house filled with conversation and laughter, I found myself slipping away from James's side more frequently and for longer periods. I spoke with his colleagues' wives, discovering shared interests and exchanging phone numbers with promises of coffee dates that for once I intended to keep. When Samantha arrived, her vibrant energy and loud laugh drawing attention, James's expression tightened. He had met her only once before and had later complained that she was lacking refinement. To me, her authenticity was like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy atmosphere of our social circle. "Birthday girl," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a tight hug. "You look gorgeous. This dress is fabulous." The dress was new, purchased secretly during a lunch break, and hidden in the back of my closet until today. It was more colourful and slightly more fitted than what James typically approved of, and I had nervously expected a comment when I emerged from our bedroom wearing it. Instead, with guests due to arrive any minute, he had merely frowned and checked his watch, lacking the time to request I change. As Samantha and I caught up, I felt a strange sensation that took me a moment to identify: freedom. Standing in my own home, surrounded by people engaged in a conversation that wasn't being monitored or corrected, I felt momentarily liberated from the invisible constraints that normally bound me. Throughout the evening, I noticed James hovering, inserting himself into my conversations when they continued too long without his participation. Each time he approached, my shoulders would tense automatically, my voice would lower, and my sentences would shorten. Samantha noticed, giving me a curious look but saying nothing. As the evening progressed, James's irritation became increasingly difficult for him to disguise. When I laughed too loudly at something Melissa said, he appeared instantly at my side, his hand finding the small of my back in what looked like an affectionate gesture, but applied enough pressure to guide me away from the conversation. "Perhaps you should check on the catering in the kitchen," he suggested quietly. "The appetizers aren't being replenished quickly enough." It was an excuse to separate me from the group, and we both knew it. But tonight, fueled by the unusual feeling of support surrounding me and the 2 glasses of wine I'd managed to drink without James monitoring my intake, I stood my ground. "The caterers are professionals, James. I'm sure they're handling it perfectly," I replied, matching his quiet tone, but remaining firmly in place beside my sister. A flash of surprise crossed his features before his public mask reasserted itself. He nodded stiffly and moved away to engage with David, though I felt his eyes tracking me across the room for the remainder of the evening. As dinner concluded and before dessert was served, I felt a sudden impulse to speak. Without consulting James, I tapped my glass with a spoon, drawing the attention of our guests. James froze mid-conversation, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to wariness. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight." I began, my voice stronger than I had anticipated. Birthdays are a time for reflection, and looking around this room, I'm grateful for both old connections and new friendships. I spoke about my appreciation for Melissa's constant support, the joy of reconnecting with Samantha, and my hope to become more involved in our community in the coming year. Then, without planning to, I found myself adding, "I'm also excited to announce that I'll be restarting my graphic design career. It's been too long since I've pursued my passion professionally, and it's time to change that." The words hung in the air like a declaration of independence. Across the room, James's face had gone completely still, his eyes boring into mine, with an intensity that would have silenced me in the past. But something had shifted. The small flame of self-determination that had been flickering inside me all evening suddenly burned brighter. As guests applauded politely, I saw David approach James and clap him on the shoulder, saying something I couldn't hear. James nodded mechanically, his eyes never leaving me as conversation resumed and the caterers began serving cake. As the evening progressed, the tension between James and me became a palpable presence at the party. While guests chatted and enjoyed themselves, I could feel his anger simmering beneath his polite exterior. His eyes followed me, constantly narrowing whenever I laughed or engaged deeply in conversation with someone. After my unexpected announcement, I found myself speaking with David near the drink table. His interest in my design background seemed genuine, unlike the perfunctory questions James's colleagues usually asked before steering conversations back to finance. "We actually need some fresh marketing materials for a new investment package," David mentioned, sipping his scotch. "The firm we've been using is good, but a bit, shall we say, conventional. Your portfolio shows a more contemporary aesthetic that might work better for younger investors." "I would love to discuss that possibility," I replied, feeling a rush of excitement at the prospect of real client work. "I could prepare some preliminary concepts if you'd like to see my approach." "That would be excellent." David smiled, reaching for his phone. "Let me give you my direct email so we can—" Suddenly, James was beside us, his hand firmly gripping my elbow. "Excuse us for a moment, David," he said with a tight smile. "I need Hannah's help in the kitchen." Before I could protest, James was steering me through the dining room and into the kitchen, his fingers digging painfully into my arm. Once we were out of sight of the guests, he released me with enough force that I stumbled slightly against the counter. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but unable to disguise his fury. "Announcing a career restart. Soliciting work from my boss. Have you lost your mind?" I rubbed my elbow where his grip had left red marks. "I didn't solicit anything. David brought it up himself." "After you dangled the bait with your little impromptu speech," James countered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "We discussed this, Hannah. Your little design hobby is fine for Christmas cards and dinner invitations, but my wife does not need to work. It reflects poorly on me, like I can't provide adequately." "It's not about money, James. It's about having something of my own using my skills." He stepped closer, his voice dropping even lower. "This is my career we're talking about, my firm, my colleagues. You had no right to embarrass me like this." "Embarrass you?" I felt something snap inside me, years of suppressed anger suddenly finding a voice. "How is my wanting a career embarrassing to you? Do you hear yourself?" James's eyes widened, slightly unaccustomed to this direct challenge. Before he could respond, we both became aware of Laura entering the kitchen, stopping awkwardly when she realized she had interrupted an argument. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing between us. "I was just looking for more ice." "Of course," I replied quickly, grateful for the interruption. "It's in the freezer door. Please help yourself." James immediately shifted into his public persona, all charm and ease. "Laura, I was just telling Hannah what a lovely party this has been. You and David must come over for dinner soon, something more intimate, where we can really talk." Laura's eyes flickered to my face, then back to James. "That would be nice," she said neutrally, collecting the ice. As she turned to leave, she added, "Hannah, I'd love to hear more about your design work sometime. Perhaps coffee next week?" Before James could intercept, I quickly replied, "I'd love that. Tuesday morning works for me." Laura smiled warmly, then returned to the party. James's facade dropped the instant she was out of earshot. "Cancel it," he ordered. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever rebellion this is, it stops now. We'll discuss it later. Right now you need to go out there and act like the grateful, happy wife you're supposed to be." His words hit me like physical blows. Supposed to be. Not who I was, but the role I was meant to play in his carefully constructed life. For the first time I saw our marriage with complete clarity. I was a prop, an accessory, a reflection of his success, nothing more. Taking a deep breath, I walked past him back into the dining room where our guests were finishing dessert. I plastered on a smile and circulated playing my assigned role, while something resolute hardened inside me. But the mask was slipping, and I found it increasingly difficult to pretend everything was fine. As the evening began winding down, guests gathered in the living room for a final toast. James stood beside me, one arm wrapped possessively around my waist, glass raised in his other hand. "To my beautiful wife on her birthday," he declared, his public voice smooth and affectionate. "Hannah, you make every day brighter with your presence. I'm the luckiest man alive to call you mine." The word mine rang in my ears as guests smiled and raised their glasses. Mine like a possession, a thing to be owned and controlled. As we sipped our champagne, I found myself saying quietly, almost to myself, "I'm not sure anyone belongs to anyone else. We belong to ourselves first, don't we?" I hadn't meant it as a public statement, but in the momentary quiet, my words carried. Several guests looked uncomfortable, while Melissa and Samantha exchanged glances. James's arm around my waist tightened painfully. "My wife, the philosopher," he said with a forced laugh. "Always thinking deeply about things. It's one of her many charming qualities, even when she's had a bit too much champagne." A few polite chuckles followed, but I saw David watching us with an unreadable expression. Something in me refused to let James have the last word to once again reframe my thoughts as silly or intoxicated ramblings. "I'm not drunk, James," I said clearly. "I'm just finally being honest." The silence that followed was deafening. James's face flushed red, then drained of colour. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of his chest against my side as he struggled to maintain control. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. "Hannah is obviously tired from hosting. Perhaps we should call it a night." But the damage to his narrative was done. Guests began making awkward movements toward collecting purses and jackets, the comfortable atmosphere of the party shattered by the obvious tension between host and hostess. As James guided people toward the door with forced joviality, I found myself standing beside a side table, displaying the birthday gifts I had yet to open. Melissa approached, concern evident in her expression. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "That was intense." "I'm fine," I assured her, feeling strangely calm. "Better than fine, actually. It's like I'm finally waking up." James returned to the living room, his public smile vanishing the instant the last guest, except Melissa, had been ushered toward the door. His eyes were cold as winter as he approached us. "Melissa, thank you for coming," he said, his tone making it clear her presence was no longer welcome. "I'm sure Hannah appreciates it, but it's getting late." My sister stood her ground. "Actually, I thought I'd help clean up a bit before heading out." "That won't be necessary," James replied. "The cleaning service comes tomorrow." The tension in the room was unbearable. I touched Melissa's arm gently. "It's okay. We can have lunch tomorrow, right?" She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave me alone with James. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." I nodded, trying to convey with my eyes that I would be okay. "Thank you for everything today. The banner was perfect." James stood rigid, waiting impatiently as we hugged goodbye. The moment the front door closed behind Melissa, he turned to me, all pretense abandoned. "You made a complete fool of me tonight," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "In my own home, in front of my colleagues, my boss." "I spoke my mind, James. That's all." "Your mind," he scoffed. "When did you start thinking you were entitled to contradict me publicly? To announce career plans we never discussed? To undermine everything I've built?" I began gathering empty glasses from side tables needing to occupy my hands. "I don't need your permission to have aspirations, James." He followed me into the kitchen, his anger growing with each step. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me, by embarrassing me, by flirting with my boss." The accusation was so absurd, I actually laughed a short, incredulous sound. Flirting. We were discussing potential freelance work, James. Professional business. Behind my back, he shouted finally, losing the tight control he had maintained all evening. "Making arrangements with my boss without even consulting me." "The way you make decisions about our life without consulting me," I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. "Like when you decided I should quit my job, or when you restricted my access to our finances, or when you systematically cut me off from everyone I cared about." James stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In a way, he was. The woman who had obediently accepted his control for years was vanishing, replaced by someone who recognized the cage she had been living in and was rattling the bars. "You've never appreciated anything I've done for you," he said, his voice cold. "I gave you a beautiful home, financial security, a position in society, and this is the gratitude I get." Gratitude. The word ignited something in me. Should I be grateful for being isolated, for being controlled, for having to account for every dollar I spend while you make all the decisions? That's not a marriage, James. That's ownership. His face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful selfish!" The slap came suddenly, his open palm connecting with my cheek, with enough force to snap my head to the side. The sound echoed in the kitchen like a gunshot. For a split-second time seemed to stop. I raised my hand to my stinging cheek, feeling the heat spreading across my skin. James stood frozen, his hand still raised, shock replacing anger in his expression as he realized what he had done. Behind him in the doorway to the dining room stood David and Laura, who had apparently returned for a forgotten purse and witnessed everything. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then from deep within me came a sound I never expected: laughter. It started small, almost a giggle, then grew into a full, genuine laugh that bubbled up from some hidden wellspring of liberation. Everyone stared at me in confusion, David and Laura with concern, James with growing alarm. My laughter continued, tears streaming down my face, years of tension releasing in this most inappropriate moment. "Hannah," James began, his voice uncertain for the first time I could remember. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I interrupted, my laughter subsiding into hiccups. "You absolutely meant it, and in a way I'm grateful, because now everyone sees what I've been living with, including me." The room remained frozen in the aftermath of the slap and my unexpected laughter. David stood in the doorway, his hand protectively guiding his wife slightly behind him, while James looked as though he had swallowed something poisonous. The perfect image he had cultivated for years had shattered in an instant, and his eyes darted frantically between me and his boss, calculating the damage. "David," he began, his voice unnaturally high, "this isn't what it looks like. Hannah and I were having a disagreement, and we saw exactly what happened, James." David interrupted, his normally pleasant voice now cold steel. "There is no explanation that would make what we just witnessed acceptable." My laughter had subsided, but a strange calm had settled over me. Years of walking on eggshells, of carefully managing my words and actions to avoid provoking James's displeasure, suddenly seemed ridiculous. The worst had happened, he had struck me in front of witnesses, and somehow I felt lighter rather than more afraid. "I think everyone at the party saw what was happening tonight," I said quietly. The controlling comments, the way you interrupted me, how you tried to dismiss my career announcement. The slap was just the physical manifestation of what you've been doing emotionally for years. James's face drained of colour. "Hannah, you're upset and exaggerating. We can discuss this privately." He turned to David and Laura with a strained smile. "Marriage has its difficult moments. I'm sure you understand." "What I understand," David replied evenly, "is that I just witnessed an assault. Laura, perhaps you should stay with Hannah while I help James collect some things. I believe he needs to spend the night elsewhere." The authority in David's voice surprised me. This wasn't just James's boss speaking. This was someone taking a moral stand. James seemed equally shocked, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. "That won't be necessary," James finally managed. "This is my home. If anyone should leave, it's—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Laura interrupted, moving past her husband to stand beside me. "Hannah is there. Someone we can call for you. Your sister, perhaps?" Before I could answer, James found his voice again. "This is absurd. One regrettable moment doesn't erase 7 years of marriage. Hannah knows I've never done anything like this before. It was a momentary lapse in judgment." "Was it?" I asked, turning to face him directly. "Or was it the inevitable conclusion of years of control? You've been hurting me in other ways for so long, James." Tonight just made it visible. Laura's arm came around my shoulders in a gesture of support, and I was surprised to find myself leaning into it, accepting comfort from this woman I barely knew. James watched this with growing desperation, seeing his carefully constructed world collapsing. "Everyone needs to calm down," he insisted. "Hannah is clearly emotional right now, making wild accusations." I apologized for losing my temper. "These things happen in every marriage." "No, James, they don't," David said firmly. "And I suspect this isn't about one slap, is it, Hannah?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than James's usual dismissive tone, broke something loose inside me. Words began pouring out: the financial control, the isolation from friends and family, the constant criticism and correction, the gradual erosion of my independence and identity. As I spoke, Laura's arm tightened around me supportively, while David's expression grew increasingly grave. James attempted to interrupt several times, but David silenced him with a raised hand. When I finally finished, the kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and my slightly ragged breathing. "You're making me sound like some kind of monster," James said quietly, adopting the hurt tone he often used to make me question my perceptions. "After everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I've made to give you a good life. A cage, no matter how gilded, is still a cage," I replied, the words coming from some newly awakened part of me. The front door opened and closed in the distance, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Elaine, James's mother, appeared in the doorway, her eyebrows raising at the scene before her. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "James called me, said there was some sort of situation." Of course he had. Elaine had always been his most reliable ally in controlling me, her subtle reinforcement of his authority, a constant presence in our marriage. "Your son struck Hannah," Laura said before anyone else could speak, her voice firm and unapologetic. "We witnessed it." Elaine's expression flickered between shock and immediate damage control. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. James would never—" "He did, Mother." James interrupted, his strategy shifting. "It was a terrible mistake. I lost my temper momentarily. Hannah knows I've been under tremendous pressure at work, and tonight with the party and everything, it all became too much." The familiar pattern of excuse and justification churned my stomach. How many times had I accepted similar explanations for his emotional cruelty, his controlling behavior, his subtle punishments when I failed to meet his expectations? "Work pressure doesn't make someone hit their spouse," I said quietly, "and it doesn't explain the years of control and isolation before tonight." Elaine turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Hannah. James provides everything for you, and you repay him with these accusations." "That's enough," David interjected. "Mrs. Ellis, with all due respect, I saw what happened. This isn't a matter of interpretation." James, seeing his mother's intervention failing, changed tactics again. "I think we all need to step back and cool off," he said, attempting to sound reasonable. "It's late, emotions are running high. I'll go stay at the Marriott tonight, and Hannah and I can discuss this tomorrow when everyone's calmer." "I'm not discussing anything with you tomorrow," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Or any day after that. We're done, James." The words hung in the air with a finality that silenced everyone. James stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and calculation. "You don't mean that," he said finally. "You're upset, I understand that, but 7 years of marriage doesn't end over one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake. It was the culmination of thousands of small cruelties, of systematic control, of making me doubt myself at every turn." I turned to Laura. "Would you mind calling my sister? Her number is in my phone." As Laura nodded and reached for my phone on the counter, James made one last attempt. "Hannah, be reasonable. Where will you go? What will you do? You haven't worked in years. You have no money of your own." The naked truth of his control strategy, spoken aloud in front of witnesses, seemed to hang in the air. David's expression hardened further. "She has options, James," he said coldly, "and from what I've heard tonight, it sounds like she has grounds for a very comprehensive divorce settlement." Elaine gasped. "Divorce? This is ridiculous. A minor disagreement blown completely out of proportion." "It wasn't minor to me," I said, finding strength in finally speaking my truth. "None of it has been minor. I've just been convinced that my feelings didn't matter, that I was overreacting, that I should be grateful for a life that was slowly suffocating me." Laura returned my phone in hand. "Melissa is on her way. She'll be here in 15 minutes. James looked around the room, seeing no allies, and finally reached for his keys on the counter. "Fine. I'll go to the Marriott tonight. When you've calmed down, Hannah, call me and we can discuss this rationally." "Don't hold your breath," I murmured as he turned to leave Elaine trailing behind him with final glares thrown in my direction. As the front door closed behind them, my legs suddenly felt unable to support me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Are you all right?" Laura asked, sitting beside me and taking my hand. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I don't know what happens now." David pulled out his phone. "First things first. We should document that mark on your face. It might be important later." The pragmatic suggestion surprised me, but I nodded permission as he carefully took several photos of my reddened cheek. The practical action grounded me, reminding me that this wasn't just an emotional crisis, but a situation with legal and financial implications. "I'm sorry you had to witness all this," I said, embarrassment beginning to creep in now that James was gone. "Don't apologize," Laura said firmly. "We're glad we were here. No one should face something like this alone." "Agreed." David nodded agreement. "And for what it's worth, Hannah, I wasn't just saying that about the divorce settlement. If you need a recommendation for an excellent attorney, I know several." The kindness from these virtual strangers brought tears to my eyes for the first time that evening. Not from pain or fear, but from relief at being believed, supported, seen as a person worthy of respect. When Melissa arrived moments later, bursting through the door with panic in her eyes, the story had to be told again. She listened with growing anger, then enfolded me in a tight hug. "You're coming home with me tonight," she declared, brooking no argument. "Pack whatever you need. The rest can wait. As I moved through the house gathering essentials, a change of clothes, toiletries, important documents I had secretly copied months ago, a strange sense of unreality washed over me. Was I really leaving? After 7 years of gradually surrendering my autonomy, was I reclaiming it in one dramatic night? David and Laura waited patiently in the living room, refusing to leave, until they were certain Melissa and I were safely on our way. Before we left, Laura pressed a business card into my hand. "My personal number is on the back," she said quietly. "Call any time, day or night, and that coffee invitation for Tuesday still stands." "Thank you," I whispered, overwhelmed by the unexpected alliance. "For everything." As Melissa drove us away from the house that had been both my home and my prison, I watched the familiar street recede in the side mirror. The woman who had entered that house 7 years ago didn't exist anymore. Neither did the one who had celebrated birthdays there in careful compliance with her husband's expectations. In their place was someone new, someone I was just beginning to meet. "What are you thinking?" Melissa asked, glancing over at me. "That I should have laughed years ago," I replied. "It would have saved me so much time." The days following my birthday unfolded in a blur of conflicting emotions. I woke the first morning on Melissa's pull-out couch, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. My phone displayed 37 missed calls and 22 text messages from James, ranging from apologetic pleas to thinly veiled threats. "I'm worried about you. Please call so we can talk. You're being irrational. We can work through this. Do you realize what you're throwing away, everything I've built for us? Your behavior is embarrassing us both. Think about what people will say." Each message followed the familiar pattern of manipulation he had perfected over our years together. First concern, then dismissal of my feelings, followed by reminders of my dependency, and finally the spectre of social judgment. The progression was so predictable I could have written the messages myself. Melissa found me staring at my phone, scrolling through his words with a strange detachment. She gently took the device from my hands and placed a mug of coffee in its place. "You don't have to read those, you know," she said, sitting beside me, "and you definitely don't have to respond." "I know," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. It's just strange to see his tactics so clearly now. How did I not recognize this pattern before? "Because that's how emotional abuse works," Melissa explained softly. "It's gradual, normalized. By the time it's obvious to outsiders, you've been conditioned to doubt your own perceptions." Later that morning, Laura called to check on me. The genuine concern in her voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "David spoke with the firm's legal department this morning," she informed me. "They've recommended a family law attorney who specializes in cases involving financial control and emotional abuse. Her name is Catherine Rivera, and she's expecting your call whenever you're ready." The reality that I was actually considering divorce, that my marriage was truly ending, hit me with fresh force. Despite everything, a small part of me still struggled with the gravity of the step I was taking. James had spent years convincing me I couldn't survive without him, that no one else would want me, that I was lucky he tolerated my many failings. Those poisonous thoughts didn't disappear overnight. "What if I'm overreacting?" I whispered to Melissa that evening, vulnerability washing over me as darkness fell. "He only hit me once. Maybe if I had been more understanding about his stress." "Hannah," Melissa interrupted firmly, taking my hands in hers. "Listen to me. This isn't about one slap. This is about years of control, isolation, and emotional abuse. The slap was just the physical manifestation of what he's been doing to your spirit all this time." "Okay." I nodded slowly, recognizing my own words from the night before, now reflected back to me. "It's strange. When it was happening, I couldn't see it clearly. Now that I'm out, I can't understand why I stayed so long." "Because he made sure you had nowhere else to go," Melissa replied simply. "He systematically cut you off from support, made you financially dependent, and convinced you that his version of reality was the only valid one." The second day brought a new escalation. Elaine appeared at Melissa's apartment unannounced, her luxury sedan, conspicuously out of place in the modest neighborhood. Melissa answered her persistent knocking while I remained out of sight in the bedroom. "Hannah is resting and doesn't want visitors," I heard my sister say firmly. "Don't be ridiculous." Elaine's commanding voice carried easily through the apartment. "I'm family, not a visitor. James is absolutely devastated. This whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion, and it needs to be resolved before irreparable damage is done. The only irreparable damage I'm concerned about is what your son has done to my sister's sense of self-worth," Melissa replied. She'll contact you both when she's ready, not before. You've never liked James, Elaine accused. I suspect you've been poisoning Hannah's mind against him for years. Melissa's laugh was short and bitter. I barely saw Hannah for years because James made sure to keep her isolated. If anyone was poisoning minds, it wasn't me. The conversation ended with Elaine's threat to return with James and her parting shot. She has no idea what she's giving up. Without James, she's nothing and has nothing. Those words echoed in my mind as I called Catherine Rivera that afternoon and scheduled a consultation for the following day. Elaine had inadvertently crystallized exactly why I needed to leave in James's world. I was indeed nothing without him. The very idea that I might have value, identity, or purpose independent of him was inconceivable to both mother and son. On the third day, James's approach shifted from messages to financial pressure. I discovered my access to our joint checking account had been restricted and the credit card I carried had been frozen. The allowance account contained less than $200, far too little to retain legal representation. He's panicking, Catherine observed during our initial consultation in her downtown office. It's a common tactic when control starts slipping away. First emotional leverage, then financial pressure. Catherine was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. As I detailed the history of our relationship, including the financial arrangements, she took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me articulate patterns I hadn't fully recognized. "Did you sign a prenuptial agreement?" she asked. "No, we married quickly, and James said it wasn't necessary since he would always take care of me." I replied, the phrase now sounding more ominous than romantic. Catherine smiled for the first time. "That works in your favor. Minnesota is an equitable distribution state. Given the duration of your marriage and the circumstances of control, we have a strong case for a substantial settlement, including temporary support, while proceedings are underway." She explained the process for filing a restraining order based on the incident at the birthday party, emphasizing that David and Laura's witness testimony would be invaluable. When I hesitated at the thought of further involving James's boss in our personal affairs, Catherine was direct. "Hannah, you need to understand something. Men like James rely on their victims' reluctance to make things public. Silence protects abusers, not survivors." I left her office with a clearer understanding of the path ahead and paperwork for both a restraining order and divorce filing. The weight on my shoulders felt simultaneously heavier and more manageable now that there was a concrete plan. That evening, while Melissa and I were discussing the consultation over dinner, an unexpected knock at the door silenced our conversation. Through the peephole, Melissa identified James standing alone in the hallway, a bouquet of roses in one hand. "Don't open it," I whispered, my heart racing. "Please." Melissa nodded, stepping away from the door. The knocking continued, becoming more insistent. "Hannah, I know you're in there," James called, his voice carrying easily through the apartment door. "I just want to talk. I brought your favorite flowers." They weren't my favorite flowers. I had told him years ago that I preferred lilies, but he always bought roses because he liked their classic elegance. Even this supposed peace offering demonstrated his fundamental disregard for my preferences. "Hannah, please." His voice took on the wounded tone he used when playing the victim. "Don't throw away 7 years over one mistake. I love you. I'm getting therapy. Things will be different." When we didn't respond, his tone shifted. "This is childish, Hannah. You can't hide forever. We need to talk like adults about our marriage. You're my wife." The possessive emphasis on "my" sent a chill through me. Melissa silently retrieved her phone and began recording the one-sided conversation, motioning for me to remain quiet. "Fine," James finally snapped after several minutes of alternating between pleading and demands. "Stay in there with your sister poisoning your mind against me. But remember, I control every account you have access to. How long can you last without money? How will you pay for this divorce you think you want? Be realistic, Hannah. You need me." His footsteps finally retreated down the hallway. Once we were sure he was gone, Melissa stopped the recording and immediately sent it to Catherine Rivera. "Evidence," she explained. "He just admitted to financial abuse on record." Later that night, as I prepared for bed, a text arrived from an unknown number. It was Laura checking in again. "David spoke with HR today. James has been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into conduct unbecoming a company officer. Thought you should know. Stay strong. Coffee Tuesday still on." The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. not of sadness, but of validation. For the first time, James was facing consequences for his behavior, and people believed me. The fortress of isolation he had built around me was crumbling brick by brick. As I drifted towards sleep on Melissa's uncomfortable pull-out couch, I realized that despite the uncertainty and fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate bargaining hope that tomorrow James might be in a good mood and therefore my world would be temporarily peaceful, but authentic hope for a future I could shape with my own hands. 6 months passed, like scenes from a movie I was simultaneously watching and starring in. The woman I had been while married to James seemed increasingly like a character I had once played rather than a version of myself. The initial weeks following the birthday party incident unfolded with predictable turbulence. James cycled through his full repertoire of manipulation tactics, from tearful apologies and grand gestures to vicious accusations and financial warfare. When the restraining order was granted limiting his ability to contact me directly, he enlisted mutual acquaintances as messengers, each bearing some variation of "James is so sorry," or "he's really changed," or "he's devastated without you." Elaine proved particularly persistent, appearing at Melissa's workplace to deliver handwritten letters from James that managed to be simultaneously apologetic and blame-shifting. When this approach failed, she resorted to thinly veiled threats about my financial future. James built his career on being meticulous, she told Melissa during one unwelcome visit. "Do you really think he hasn't protected his assets? Hannah will get nothing if she pursues this vindictive divorce." What James and his mother hadn't anticipated was the network of support that materialized around me. David and Laura remained steadfast allies, with Laura becoming a surprisingly close friend. Our Tuesday coffee became a weekly ritual during which she offered both emotional support and practical assistance in navigating the professional world I was re-entering after years of isolation. "The marketing team was blown away by your portfolio concept," she told me during our third meeting, sliding a check across the table. "They want to commission the full set of materials for the new investment package." The amount written on the check nearly made me drop my coffee cup. It wasn't just my first professional income in years, it represented enough money to secure a small studio apartment of my own and contribute toward Catherine's retainer. Catherine Rivera proved worth every penny of her considerable fees. When James's attorney attempted to claim that I had exaggerated the abuse and provoked the slap through erratic behavior, Catherine produced statements from David, Laura, and 3 other party guests who had observed James's controlling behavior throughout the evening. When his team argued that I deserved only minimal support because I was capable of working, Catherine countered with expert testimony about how economic abuse and enforced career interruption impact a spouse's earning capacity. The divorce proceedings dragged on as James fought every provision, but Catherine had warned me to expect this. "Control is his currency," she explained during one particularly discouraging meeting. "The longer he can keep you entangled in legal proceedings, the longer he feels he still has some hold over your life." Understanding his tactics made them slightly easier to endure, but the emotional toll remained significant. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Eleanor Park, who specialized in recovery from controlling relationships. Our weekly sessions became anchors in the stormy process of rebuilding my identity. "The question isn't why you stayed so long," Dr. Park told me during an early session when I was berating myself for the years I had lost. "The question is how you found the strength to leave when you did, despite everything designed to prevent exactly that." That reframing helped me begin to see myself not as a victim who had foolishly allowed abuse, but as a survivor who had ultimately broken free against tremendous odds. The distinction was subtle but transformative. Professionally, I rebuilt my design career one client at a time. The work for David's firm led to referrals, and soon I had enough projects to require a dedicated workspace in my new apartment. Each completed assignment, each satisfied client, each deposit into my own bank account represented another brick in the foundation of my independence. My relationship with my parents underwent its own healing process. When I finally told them the full story of my marriage, my father wept openly, while my mother sat in stunned silence. We knew something wasn't right. Mum finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "You changed so much, became so distant. But James always had plausible explanations, and we were afraid of pushing you further away by criticizing him. He was very good at what he did," I assured them, finding forgiveness easier than I had expected. "He fooled a lot of people for a long time, including me. Their support in the months that followed was unwavering, from regular phone calls to care packages and visits that helped restore the connection James had systematically undermined. My friendship with Natalie, my college best friend whom James had effectively banished from my life, rekindled after an initially awkward reunion. "I thought you just outgrew me," she admitted over drinks in a downtown bar, the familiar cadence of her laugh bringing back memories of who I had been before James. Or that I had somehow offended you and you were too polite to say so. He convinced me you were jealous of our relationship. I explained the absurdity of it, now painfully clear, that you were trying to undermine us because you were unhappy being single. Natalie snorted. "Classic! Make the person who notices the red flag seem like the problem." As winter turned to spring, the legal battle finally reached its conclusion. James, facing mounting evidence and the testimony of credible witnesses, eventually accepted a settlement that included a significant financial package and division of assets that Catherine described as very favourable under the circumstances. What surprised me most was my reaction when Catherine called with the news that the divorce was finalised. Instead of elation or even relief, I felt a quiet sense of closure, like turning the final page of a book that had been difficult but necessary to read. I marked the occasion by having dinner with Melissa, Laura, Natalie, and 2 women I had met through a support group for survivors of controlling relationships. As we shared a bottle of champagne, I realised I had built something James had systematically tried to prevent, a genuine community of my own. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalised, I encountered James unexpectedly at a coffee shop downtown. I had just finished a meeting with a new client and was collecting my laptop when I turned and found him standing 3 feet away, staring at me with an unreadable expression. My heart raced momentarily, old fear responses flickering to life before subsiding just as quickly. He looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than the figure who had loomed so large in my nightmares. "Hannah," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I am well." An awkward silence stretched between us. I noticed he was twisting his wedding ring, a nervous habit I had forgotten until that moment. He was still wearing it, I realised, though mine had been sold months ago, the proceeds donated to a domestic violence shelter. "I heard your business is doing well," he finally said. "Someone at the firm mentioned they saw your designs for the Miller account." "Yes, things are good," I confirmed, offering no further details about my life. "I should go. I have another appointment." As I moved to step past him, he spoke again, his voice lower. "I'm sorry, Hannah, for everything. I've been seeing a therapist. I understand now what I did to you." I paused, searching his face for the manipulation I had learned to recognise. But what I saw instead was something unexpected. Genuine regret, perhaps, but also the fundamental self-centeredness that had characterised our entire relationship. Even his apology positioned him as the main character, his growth the central narrative. "I hope that helps you, James," I said simply. "Goodbye." Walking away from him, out into the spring sunshine, I felt the last tendrils of his influence falling away. The encounter that once would have devastated me, leaving me questioning my decisions and yearning for his approval, now registered as little more than a brief, awkward meeting with someone I used to know. In the months that followed, I continued building my design business, eventually taking on enough clients to lease a small office space and hire a part-time assistant. I began volunteering at a local organisation that supported women leaving abusive relationships, offering both design services for their materials and occasional talks about recognising the signs of control and emotional manipulation. Through this volunteer work, I met Michael, a kind-eyed attorney who specialised in family law and donated time to help women secure protective orders. Our first few conversations were purely professional, but gradually shifted to include personal topics. When he eventually asked me to dinner, I surprised myself by accepting. "I should warn you," I told him on our second date, "I come with a complicated history and trust issues that are still being resolved." Michael's response was simple. "We all have history. The important thing is to keep writing new chapters." The relationship progressed slowly, each step forward deliberate and thoughtful. Unlike the whirlwind romance with James, this connection developed with mutual respect and careful attention to boundaries. I found myself applying the lessons Dr. Park and I had discussed, recognizing the difference between genuine care and possessive control. On my 33rd birthday, 1 year after the slap that had changed everything, I celebrated with a small gathering at my apartment. Melissa and my parents, Natalie and her new boyfriend Laura and David, several clients who had become friends, and Michael surrounded me with genuine warmth and affection. As I blew out the candles on a cake Melissa had baked, Michael leaned over and asked quietly, "What did you wish for?" I smiled, looking around at the life I had reclaimed and rebuilt. "Nothing," I replied honestly. "I already have everything I need." Later that evening, after everyone had left except Michael and Melissa, who was helping clean up, I found myself standing on my small balcony, watching the city lights and reflecting on the year's journey. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said, joining me with 2 mugs of tea. "I was just thinking about laughter," I replied, accepting the warm mug gratefully. How strange it is that in the worst moment of my marriage, laughter was what finally broke the spell. "Sometimes the most powerful response to control is joy," Michael observed. "It's the one thing they can't contain or define." As Melissa finished in the kitchen and joined us on the balcony, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. The woman who had laughed in the face of her abuser a year ago had been acting on instinct, finding an unexpected path to freedom. The woman I was becoming now was laughing by choice, building a life defined by authentic connections rather than coercive control. "To laughter," I said, raising my mug in a small toast, "and to writing our own stories." Have you ever experienced a moment when an unexpected reaction changed everything? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember that you deserve relationships based on respect and equality, never control. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the courage to laugh when the world expects your tears.